about the photos, just also feel free to message Lauren some of those own stories. And we're going to kind of begin a little bit before any organized Jewish activity began on campus with an overview of Ithaca College's own history. So Ithaca College was originally established as a conservatory of music. It was established on September 19th, 1892 by W. Grant Egbert as the first president. The first classes for IC students were held inside 4 rooms at a house at 403 East Seneca Street. So we just began very small inside a family-sized home before we eventually moved into the grounds of the Wilgus Opera House, which you can see a photo of in the top right. Interestingly enough, on the ground floor of the building was Rothschild's brothers, whose founder, Jacob Rothschild, was one of the earliest Jewish settlers in Ithaca. We think the first Jewish families in Ithaca arrived somewhere in the 1850s. Many of them were traveling merchants. Jacob was one of the first businesses that grew prosperous enough that they could buy a brick and mortar building instead of just kind of selling out of what they could carry. We saw by 1897, the college's first graduation class consisted of 2 students, and by 1909, it had grown to 12 students. So again, we started out fairly modest. We don't know in these earliest years how many Jewish students were on campus. Ithaca Conservatory was a non-sectarian institution and did not ask any sort of questions about students' religious identities. And there was no, unlike many colleges at the time, no religious community that was sponsoring the college and helping to guide its work. Even within the town of Ithaca itself, Jewish student organizations were not established at Cornell until around 1907. Zeta Beta Tau fraternity was the first Jewish organization in Ithaca. It was also the first Jewish fraternity established in the United States in the 1890s in New York City. In 1912, the Menorah Society was established. This was the first student organization that was inclusive of all students, no matter what their sex. And the Menorah Society was itself created at Harvard in 1906 and had grown by 1912, 1913 to encompass several campuses. And it kind of lasted nationally until really about the 1930s. And then it kind of started to fade into Hillel B'nai B'rith, which was first established in 1923 at University of Illinois. We do have an idea that by the 1910s, the names of some of the first Jewish students at IC, Bertha Bennett and Ruth Siegel, were both recorded in the Cornell Daily Sun as participating in the activities of the Menorah Society. You can see one of these pictures in the lower left of the screen. We can see that Jewish folklore was a subject of the meeting. And at the end of the meeting, Ruth was asked to give a vocal selection to kind of provide entertainment as the meeting closed out. And I do want to say I use the word possible because it is still not known for sure if these students were Jews or not. It could have been that the Menorah Society just asked some students from IC Conservatory to just attend their meetings to provide some entertainment. Maybe it was a gig for them. But I do think, considering the time period, it would not have been as likely as it is today that a non-Jewish artist was asked to attend a Menorah Society meeting. And I do feel fairly confident that these are some of the earliest Jewish students we had at Ithaca College. I should also note that during these early years, first 2 decades of the 1900s, Jewish families in Ithaca also were known to take in students into their own homes for celebrating Shabbat dinners together and the Jewish holidays. 2 of these early families we know about, the Bernsteins and Goodstats. We also have evidence that by the 1910s, there were some of the first Jewish faculty members at Ithaca College and what was then the Ithaca Conservatory of Music. One of these likely first Jewish faculty members is known as, to us, as S.P. Silverman. She's recorded in the Cornell Sun as giving a benefit concert for the Jewish War Relief Fund. World War I was raging at this time, and the Jewish community, like many Jewish communities across the country, was active in raising money to benefit refugees and fund the Red Cross and other charities operating around in the war theater. We also note that in these early years, the Jewish communities at the Conservatory, Cornell, and the city of Ithaca itself were connected, and really understanding and appreciating these connections will go a long way to explaining the future development of Jewish life at Ithaca College, and really how these communities have for many decades now been mutually contributing to one another and benefiting one another. We're moving forward just a little bit, kind of more into the 1920s, and delving a little bit deeper into the Jewish community's development in Tompkins County. In 1915, we know the Jewish community here started to organize with the intention of forming a synagogue. At the time, there were actually two separate Jewish communities in town. There was an Orthodox community called Agudath Achim and a more liberal community called Hevra Kadisha. And both these communities merged in 1924 to form Beth El. We know around this time there was about 50 Jewish families in Ithaca. So the population was still fairly modest. When fundraising for the new synagogue, it was a collaborative effort between not only the year-round Jewish residents of Ithaca, but also alumni of Cornell University, the families of current Jewish students, and even local non-Jews. We can see in the center picture a photo from the Ithaca Journal, which we can see in the headline appealing to much more than just the Jewish residents of Ithaca. Some of the Christian clergy members gave money to benefit the shul's construction, and when the synagogue was dedicated, several non-Jewish members of Ithaca spoke at the dedication, including the mayor and the then president of Cornell University. And I do mention Cornell alumni. At the time, Ithaca Conservatory of Music was still fairly small. The graduating class in 1926 was only around 92 students. That's what we see, at least, recorded in the yearbook of that year, the Cayugan. But the fundraising succeeded, and in February 24th, 1929, Temple Beth El was dedicated. There was also arrangement established whereby Hillel and Temple Beth El shared a rabbi until 1942. So this shows, once again, the really strong connection that the Jewish student community had with the year-round Jewish community here in Ithaca. One of these notable early rabbis is Rabbi David Polish. He arrived in 1939 and went on to become quite a leading figure in the Reform Jewish movement. He was helped to organize one of the main meetings of the Central Council for American Rabbis later in the 60s, and went on to found a fairly prominent synagogue in Chicago. But during his time in Ithaca, Rabbi Polish helped to organize many student activities at Temple Beth El, including Young People's Nights, dances, and religious education activities. And we can see that these spaces for Jewish students, particularly during this decade, were really important. Discrimination against Jews was still fairly widespread in American higher education. On the right, we see a photo from Once a Week, which was then Ithaca Conservatory's student newspaper, where one of the sororities, Delta Phi, advertised quite openly that Jewish women were not eligible for membership. And we do know it used the term fraternity because sorority at the time was just coming into usage. It wasn't really a popular term until later in the decade. So that's why even though Delta Phi was an organization for women, they still used the term fraternity there, but very clearly in the student newspaper for everyone to read, Jewish women not eligible for membership. Rabbi Polish was also the first Jewish leader in town to organize with Ithaca College students to establish what was called the Hillel Club. At the time, it was estimated by B'nai B'rith in 1940 that about 100 Jewish students were at Ithaca College. We know that this is about 22% of the student body at the time. So when I first read that, I was fairly surprised that at such an early time, there were so many Jewish students on campus. But then when I was looking into later decades, it actually is not too far off from where Ithaca College has been for most of its history. For many, many decades, it's been estimated that around 20% of campus is Jewish. And with that later information, I find it probably not too much of an exaggeration that yes, indeed, around 1940, we can say there's about 100 Jewish students on campus. We see here some of the early student leaders for Hillel. Some of the first activities that Hillel sponsored at Ithaca College involved the arts. It was still very much a conservatory. In 1931, Ithaca College had grown its programs to become officially Ithaca College and no longer just the Conservatory of Music, but many students were still really devoted to their studies in theater and music. So Helene Cotton, she organized a Hillel choir, and that group met under her guidance. Eleanor Kovitsky served as the Hillel council rep. At this time, B'nai B'rith Hillel was structured so that every campus had a representative to the national body. Hillel at Ithaca College was considered one of the counselor campuses. And what this meant is that the size of the Jewish community or the resources of the Jewish community on campus were not large enough that it could be a full-fledged foundation, but Hillel still recognized that there was a presence here on campus and they had some sort of affiliation with the national organization. Many of the counselorship campuses were located near larger schools that had full-fledged Hillel foundations, which Cornell had starting in 1929, making it one of the first campuses to be recognized by B'nai B'rith in this way. But IC was not quite so large. And our first president was Evelyn Tepper. We see her graduation photo from the Cayugan, 1940. She graduated. And again, all of these photos, I should also add, from this point onward, are mostly coming from the Cayugan, Ithaca's yearbook. So I just want to make sure I'm crediting them. The first Hillel chapter at the college was also strongly encouraged to participate with Cornell. And many of the Jewish holidays and Shabbat services were held at Cornell's campus. But there were some Hillel events that were held at IC, particularly theater performances. There was a group called the Hillel Players, putting on plays for the student body and the larger community. And starting around 1944, Hillel at Cornell purchased its first property, which was located at 106 Lake Street, interestingly across the street from where Chabad at Cornell is located today. And that was like the first permanent base for Hillel, and we can assume that many students also participated. World War II did bring some challenges for Ithaca College. Enrollment dropped dramatically during the years, particularly in 1944. The graduating class that year was only 26 people. And to give a little bit of insight, the class of 1940 was around 109 people. Hillel at Ithaca College likewise also faded from the records at IC. We don't really see any reference of the group from like 1943 to 1946. And it is likely that as an established organization, it once again faded back into just being associated with Cornell, and there was not an autonomous group for Jewish students at IC. But we should remember it didn't mean that Jewish students were not at IC. The synagogue in town was the host for many social events for servicemen who came to Ithaca during the war. Cornell University was the site of many officer training programs, and officers from all over the United States, including many Jewish officers, would come to Ithaca to further their studies before going back into the service actively. 3 IC students helped to organize a special dance at Temple Beth-El for Jewish servicemen in 1943. And the temple also served as a servicemen's canteen on different days of the week where they could come and get a dinner together. By 1946, enrollment at Ithaca College had rebounded and more than doubled to about 1,148 students. And of these students, 725 were veterans. So we can see during the years immediately following World War II, just the really strong presence of servicemen and women coming back from the war. And Hillel picked up its activities towards the ends of the 1940s with more social events. We can see I put advertisements from both the Ithacan and the Cornell Daily Sun, kind of giving you an example of these dances. Many of them had different themes. They were often informal, and if you came to the dance wearing formal attire, you could even be turned away. They were very strict, and many of these dances you were not to dress up, which I found just really interesting. And by 1947, the official name for Hillel here in Ithaca was the B'nai B'rith Foundation of Cornell and Ithaca College. So we can see there in the title, there's a recognition that this organization is servicing both campuses, and Jewish life had a vibrant presence at both campuses. The Hillel House also shifted by the late 1940s to a location on Stewart Avenue, 504 Stewart Avenue. It's not known why this move from Lake Street to Stewart Avenue occurred, but one theory I have is that, again, with the recognition that this group was serving both campuses, the organization sought to find a location that was more easily accessible for both Cornellians and Ithacans. 1948 also marked the arrival of Rabbi Morris Goldfarb in Ithaca. Rabbi Goldfarb had previously served as a Hillel director in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and he would be here in Ithaca working with Hillel for 32 years until his retirement in 1980. So really, we still benefit from the legacy of Rabbi Goldfarb. I know the Eruv here in town is named after him. And he really did so much on both campuses in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to grow Jewish life. Moving into the 1950s now, there was a rededication of an autonomous Jewish group at Ithaca College by the mid-50s. A professor named Dr. Jack Gelfand called a meeting for all Jewish students at the Aurora Street Gym to discuss the possibility of forming an autonomous organization at the college. And the meeting was successful, and Bob Ross, an IC student at the time, was appointed temporary president until more formal elections could be held. And the first event that this new organization or rededicated organization put on was a bagels and lox lunch at Temple Beth-El on March 6th. So the very first thing our students did, and an activity that's still very much enjoyed on campus today, is organizing a bagels and lox lunch. Other events that this new Hillel club would sponsor in the 1950s included informal dances at Temple Beth-El, theater parties, and skating and bowling outings. The yearbook in 1957 also stressed that attendance at Friday night services was really encouraged. The first formal election held by Hillel was in 1956, where David Sass was elected president. And you can see him on the photo on the left. He's the second man in the first row on the left. He served as the first president, and he was also really involved in making Hillel's interfaith activities more visible on campus. Some of these interfaith activities included participating in religious emphasis days, which was also sponsored by the Canterbury Club, a Episcopalian Greek Orthodox group on campus, and the Newman Foundation for Catholic students. Rabbi Felix Aber of Temple Beth El spoke on campus in '56 for religious emphasis days about Jewish traditions and practices. Hillel also participated in Brotherhood Week, which was another large interfaith activity to bring the different religious communities of IC together. In the 1960s, Hillel experienced another period of growth. IC students had a significant change occur in 1961 when the campus moved to the South Hill from downtown. And when I reflect on this move, I think it, especially in terms of this college's Jewish life, I think it really helped to solidify the path that Hillel was going on to be a fully autonomous organization. By the early 60s, there had been a rapprochement with Cornell Hillel, and it seems that the two organizations were once again sharing the same student board, sharing the same governing structure, but a final split occurred in 1965, and many reasons are given for this split in the record, but I feel like one of the more prominent reasons why the split occurred was simply just the distance between the two campuses. Now, we didn't see the students living in such close proximity to one another and as easily able to mingle. Now Ithacans were moved to a more periphery on the town's social life. They weren't as involved with downtown life and mixing with the Cornell students. Another symptom of this can be seen in how Temple Beth El was not the host for student activities as frequently as it used to be. Throughout the 60s, it seems that the Temple's holding events for students sponsored by Hillel less frequently, and by 1970, it's only rare that we see records of Hillel electing to use Temple Beth El's facilities to host events. More and more events began to be held at the South Hill. Jewish chaplains, however, continue to be shared between Cornell and Ithaca College. The 1960s also brought an increase in Jewish enrollment that mirrored the larger increase in the college's student body. This was the time when some of the first years of the baby boomers started to become college aged, and just nationally, there was a large influx of university students. High holiday services began to be held on campus, and that was made possible in part through Rabbi George Sobelman, who served as an assistant Jewish chaplain at Ithaca College. We can see a couple more of these early part-time staff members here from the late 60s to the early 70s. This is also the period when other Hillel traditions started that still continue to this day. October 1965 marked the very first Parents' Weekend Bagels and Lox Brunch, which we still do today. 1965 also marked the first time a Seder was held on campus, a tradition that continues. Prior to this, students had organized Seders, but they were private affairs held in their own homes, or sometimes in a venue that was rented, such as the Odd Fellows Lodge, which was once located out on Trumansburg Road. But 1965 marked the first time that Ithaca College campus itself was the site of a Seder, and the college's food service provider at the time, Sega Foods, collaborated with that. moving kind of into the 70s, there marked a time where Hillel experienced several changes in its staff. Rabbi Michael Sternfield was a student rabbi at Hebrew Union College who served for a year at Ithaca College as assistant chaplain. He was followed from 71 and 72 by Robert Lowery. Shabbat services during Robert's time became more regular on campus. They were held inside the chaplain's office coffee house, which I found just really interesting. I would have liked to go back in time and see kind of how they transformed the coffee house into a place for prayer and Shabbat services. At the time, the chaplain's office was located in Dorm 3, which I actually don't know what Dorm 3 is called now, or if the building has entirely been replaced, but they were kind of held inside that building. 1970 also marked the first time that Hillel hosted a movement-wide conference on campus. This, I think, attests to the visibility that Hillel at Ithaca College was starting to have as a, within the Hillel movement as a national organization, that they were starting to host these meetings for students from around the region and country. After Lowery left in 1972, IC students began to advocate for a full-time campus rabbi. The early 70s also witnessed an effort to establish a kosher meal plan on campus. But it seems that by 1974, this fizzled out for reasons that are not known, but it does mark kind of the first time that students and the college are working together to try to prepare kosher meals on campus, not only for Passover, which had been done before, but for the whole year round. The 1970s also marked the first time that Cornell and Ithaca College sponsored some trips to Israel together. There had been individual private organizations that had reached out to Ithaca College students in the newspaper and other venues before, but these trips in the 70s marked the first time that Hillel itself was working to help organize and sponsor trips to Israel. A really significant development occurred in August 1976. That was when Muller Chapel opened on campus. And at the time, Muller Chapel was the home for 3 religious communities on campus: Catholic, Jewish, and Protestant. The first Shabbat service inside Muller Chapel was held on September 3rd, 1976. A quick note about Muller Chapel's history. Muller Chapel's built to honor and remember Herman Muller and his wife, Florence Muller. Herman was a longtime member of the Ithaca College Board of Trustees, and as he was driving back with his wife and another member of the board from Ithaca, where they were on campus to help celebrate the dedication of a new administration building, there had been a car crash which was fatal and took his life. Muller Chapel is named after him and his wife, and that's kind of the story of, in part, of how Muller Chapel came to be as a memorial for him. August of 1976 also marked when Jane Kamey was hired as a part-time director of Hillel. She served as the first director of Hillel at Ithaca College, and she herself had a really fascinating background before and during her time at Ithaca. Jewishly, she taught classes to students about the Torah and Judaism, but her academic background was as a feminist historian, and she helped to establish the Women's Studies program at Cornell. She also is a playwright who wrote several works, including Miss Satan, which chronicled the life of an early women's suffragist and her history. She also worked to establish, or helped to establish, a Jewish studies program at IC. Hillel's larger activities during the 70s included Israel Awareness Week. These brought in speakers from the Consulate General of Israel and several Israeli authors. Also interesting to note, during this time, Hillel's was supported financially in part through membership dues. Students were asked to contribute on an annual basis to the upkeep of Hillel and become official members. This entitled them discounts to other things such as Passover meals or Shabbat meals. A Jewish newspaper also began to be published on Ithaca's campus called The Jewish Connection during this same year. Jane left campus in 1982 to make Aliyah to Israel. And after Jane departed, that's when Michael Faber started his time on campus. And Michael has the distinction of being the longest serving director that Ithaca College has ever had. And Michael also was the first time Hillel was able to have a full-time staff member on campus, at least during the academic year. This is not to say that there hadn't been leaders on campus earlier than Michael who were not working the equivalent of full-time hours, but Michael was the first person whose position was more or less officially recognized as a full-time Hillel position. I saw this line from the front page of the Ithacan on September 16th, 1982, which I thought was just really sweet and a little bit prescient. The Ithacan at the time expressed the hope that Michael's stay on campus would be a long and rewarding experience. And indeed, Michael would be on campus for 31 years and ultimately retire in May 2013. When Michael joined the staff, he quickly started teaching classes about subjects including Kabbalah, the Jewish calendar, and Hebrew. By 1984, it was estimated that about 25% of Ithaca College, 25% of the first year class was Jewish, and then 20% of the college as a whole was Jewish. That was the estimation that Hillel could come up with at the time. Hillel students participated in some noteworthy political activity, including Freedom Sunday, which was a rally of over 200,000 people in Washington, D.C. To advocate for the right of Soviet Jews to emigrate from the Soviet Union. And I believe it is to this day still the largest rally ever organized by Jewish organizations. And Ithaca College played a part in that, Ithaca College Hillel. And before this rally in DC took place, the Hillel organized a smaller rally on campus to raise awareness of the plight of Soviet Jews. Hillel also began to organize some large-scale programs by the mid-'80s and late '80s. These included Jewish Awareness Week and Israel Awareness Week. And they kind of like had week-long programs of including guest speakers and classes. And I believe one theme for many years was also an Israel nightclub night held at Union Crossroads, which was a longtime bar in Ithaca for many years. And students would organize Israeli songs and like kind of karaoke. And it was, by the accounts that I've read, considered to be quite a significant party and just a really fun time. By the late '80s, we also kind of can see the expansion of Jewish life on campus, in part through several other Jewish organizations that were established. One of these groups was termed the United Jewish Appeal, which kind of focused on issues in the Middle East and informing a larger segment of the campus community about what was going on in the Middle East. We also saw Friends of Israel form, like an Israel education group. And both these organizations, while independent groups, worked closely with Hillel. By 1987, it was estimated that about 1,400 Jewish students were active on campus, and Hillel continued to sponsor interfaith activities. One of the activities that I think I remembered most clearly was Hillel's participation in the Christmas Toy Drive. And that was sponsored in large part by the Catholic community, but Hillel contributed as a partner in that. And we also saw the late 80s really mark the start of larger scale Holocaust remembrance observances on campus. These commemorations were sponsored and co-sponsored by a wide array of campus groups, including LGBT organizations and cultural organizations on campus. And they would continue really until today. Hillel continues to sponsor yearly activities to remember the Holocaust. Another significant effort made by Hillel in the late 80s and early 90s was maintaining a kosher for Passover kitchen. This effort was really made possible in part through the collaboration of dining services, which allocated Hillel special use of a kitchen on campus. It used to be held in the East Tower, and then I think in later years moved to a kitchen in the campus center, Student Union. The food itself would be procured by Michael and cooked by Michael and students, and the kitchen was able to provide kosher for Passover meals twice a day. In later years, the college was able to work with Hillel to ensure that students could temporarily go off their meal plans to participate in this program. And really what marked the end of the kosher kitchen was the kosher for Passover kitchen was the establishment of kosher kitchen itself in '94. For the first time ever, starting in 1994, there was a program on campus that was providing a full meal plan for students who wish to maintain kosher standards. During its first year, around 85 students participated, and that also continues to be a presence on campus until today. Some other notable activities in the 90s included, again, these annual Holocaust commemoration programs. Oftentimes there were large-scale vigils held on campus. In an annual Hanukkah party, sometimes sponsored by Cornell Hillel, was also a big event. A new theater group called Hillel Players also began to put on productions. Some of their earliest productions included West Side Story and Broadway Bound. A semi-formal also was held by Hillel. Starting in the mid-90s, there also was an expansion of the staff. The first staff member who joined Michael Faber was Adam Schaefer. He came to Ithaca College through the Jewish Service Corps, which, interesting enough, as I understand through my work in Hillel right now, was kind of a precursor to the Springboard Fellowship that I'm participating in. And the Jewish Service Corps worked on many different college campuses for a number of years. From 1996 to 1999, Naomi Walensky served as a program director with Hillel at Ithaca College. And at this time, it was estimated that around 20% of IC was Jewish. We also saw a new student initiative called the Jewish Community Outreach Project. And this JCOP initiative really focused on trying to engage Jews who were culturally affiliated with their Jewish heritage, but not necessarily religious. And I thought it was interesting in part because it just kind of recognizes these larger national trends with younger Jews, that there was an increasing number of Jews who, were still connected to their heritage, but not necessarily in a religious way. So JCOP would sponsor monthly Shabbat dinners and other similar initiatives, including social outings. Some of Hillel's high holiday events in these years were quite large. They were held in Ford Hall or other larger theaters on campus. In 1991, we should also know that Hillel became foundation. So finally, after many decades, Hillel at Ithaca College is recognized by its national body as really being an example of excellence for other campuses and having a strength on campus, and it became a full-fledged foundation in '91. kind of moving into the early 2000s, some of the larger events that Hillel was able to organize include Jewish Awareness Month. One of the highlights of Jewish Awareness Month was an annual Israel Expo Fair. This kind of brought together many different organizations that offered trips to Israel or just information about Israel. For a number of years, Ithaca College was really a site for not only IC Jewish students, but just the larger Jewish community to really kind of come together and celebrate Israel and ways to get connected to Israel. In 1998, Hillel International's president, Richard Joel, visited campus, and that kind of, I believe, marked the first time that the president of B'nai B'rith Hillel visited IC to kind of see what was happening on campus and the good things. Now moving into the early 2000s, we remember, many of us, that the early 2000s was marked by some significant political events, and these also impacted Hillel. First was the Intifada in Israel, which started in the early 2000s and was a period of heightened violence in the Middle East that lasted for many years. Despite the Intifada's beginning, though, the first ever Birthright Israel trip left campus that same year in December. And the concerns didn't really seem to dissuade many students from participating in this trip. There was only 20 spots available on Ithaca College's first Birthright trip, but 70 students applied for them. And Ithaca College has continued to sponsor Birthright Israel trips once or twice a year until today. I believe this upcoming trip was the first time Birthright Israel actually has canceled their trips because of concerns around COVID-19. This spring will be the first time Ithaca College has not sponsored a Birthright trip. September 11th, 2001, saw the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and the impact on campus was palpable. September 13th saw a vigil that over 1,500 students attended. All the religious communities at Ithaca College played a role in this vigil, as well as many other campus partners and offices. I also feel that these twin incidences early in the 2000s had an effect on Hillel's programs later in the decade. We saw many programs on campus trying to make sense of the violence going on in the world, both in the Middle East and large. There were speakers brought to campus to discuss themes like radicalization, how to overcome radicalization. There was one survivor of a suicide bombing who was brought to campus to speak about her journey and how she was able to move past it and forgive her attackers. But not every Hillel program focused on such serious matters. There still continued to be religious activities and social activities. Spring 2001 marked the first festival for Jewish life in the arts on campus. And in 2005, there was the first ever Inchathon celebrated. This annual fundraiser for cancer research continues until today. 2004 also saw a year-long festival of Yiddish culture and language, and the Welcome Back Barbecue and Fresh Fest also began around 2010 to 2013. 2013 also marked the arrival of Igor Koloklov on campus as executive director. He succeeded after Michael Faber, and it was a period of growth for Hillel in 2014, December of 2014, under Igor's leadership, Hillel's recognized by Hillel International as one of the most, as a campus that really embodies excellence for other Hillel chapters, especially with its engagement work. The breadth of students who were being engaged by Hillel was exceptionally great. We also saw under Igor's time the beginning of Hillel's internship program called the Peer Network Engagement Interns. These are students who are selected because of their personal skills and leadership skills to really help engage their peers meaningfully, and that also continues until today. Kayla Reisman was also working with Hillel as a director of Jewish student life from 2014 to 2016. In July 2015, Igor left Ithaca College to begin a role at Miami, and there was a time where from 15 to 17 where there wasn't a full-time Hillel staff member on campus. Cantor Abby Lyons served as an interim executive director of Hillel during this time, and Abby continues to serve as Jewish chaplain today. In 2017, Lauren was hired, and Hillel once again kind of resumed this full-time staff member on campus. And really that's kind of where we blend into our contemporary time here. And I just kind of concluded for our last slide here a selection of events that have happened since 2014, but most of these are coming from the last 2 years. I believe the only one that's a little bit from 2014 is the band in the top right, but the rest of these photos are really from the last year. Today it's estimated that around 16% of Ithaca College is Jewish. Last year, around 650 Jewish students participated in Hillel's activities at some point during the academic year. We see events that are religious in nature, secular events, social events, and it's really been, 81 years on campus, and I hope that this presentation has kind of showed just a little bit of insight into our history. The full work on Ithaca College's history is available on the website. If you go to Google Ithaca College Hillel, you'll be taken to our main page, and then on the left side of the screen there should be a little tab that says Our History, and if you are interested you can read really the full work there, but I hope to at least given you all a sense of some of our activities over the last 8 decades. And thank you all for being with us. Lauren, have any questions been coming in?
Austin, thank you so much. I think it goes without saying that Austin has done beyond when this project was conceived. I could have never imagined that what would have come out of it is this incredibly researched document that we have today. And if you enjoyed this presentation, it really just skims the surface. Austin's full research paper is incredible, and there's so many amazing stories in there. So I highly recommend checking out our website so that you can read the whole report. He did an amazing job. We've had a few questions come into the chat, and in the last 6 minutes that we have together, I encourage you to write to me, to Lauren Goldberg, if you have any other questions. But the first question that came in is whether you had anything that you found in your research, Austin, that really surprised you.
Yeah, good question. I think one thing that surprised me was really how early the origins of Hillel Ithaca College go. I know when I started here, I think the common belief was that really we were beginning in the mid-50s or late 50s and really didn't take off until the 1970s. So to find kind of evidence that of not only Hillel going back to 1939, but really a vibrant Jewish life on campus in the late 50s and 60s really surprised me.
It surprised me as well, and I felt like I should have known that. But I know it's really incredible. How about the next question that we have is if you could speak a little bit more about the tie between the local Jewish community here in Ithaca and the Jewish community at Ithaca College, and any points that you had about that relationship.
Yeah. I think particularly in the early years, the 1920s, the 1930s, 1940s, I think we can really see how the Jewish communities at Ithaca College, Cornell, and the town of Ithaca itself really didn't develop in isolation. There was a real crossover between all three communities. They developed as a unit. I think it can be said that there were great contributions that every sector kind of made towards one another. I don't think it would have been possible, for example, for Ithaca, New York to have such a grand synagogue built in 1929 without the support of not only the local Jewish community, but the larger Jewish student and alumni communities. And moving more into more recent years, the latter half of the 20th century into today, I still would see in every decade these large scale events co-sponsored by groups like Temple Beth El, Tikkun V'Or, the Ithaca Area United Jewish Community, and the Jewish Studies departments at Cornell and Ithaca College that really benefit not only the student community, but the wider community as well. These have included large musical concerts, I believe. There's been many times where like these big name musicians in the Jewish world have come to Ithaca because of the support of all these partners. We see speakers coming into town that are utilized by the whole community. I really think a real strength of our work together is because we've worked together for so long. Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank you again, Austin, who has been exceptional in everything that he's done over the last 2 years as our Springboard Fellow. And I have to say, I had a couple points in the chat where people privately chatted me to say how exceptional you are, Austin, and I can't echo their sentiment enough. We're just so grateful that this important work has been compiled. Thank you all for joining us today, and we want to invite everyone back. You're welcome to join us for a conversation on tzedakah as justice, not as charity in this time of COVID that we're living in today, on Thursday at the same time at noon. And if you go to our Facebook page, you can find the Zoom link to that. It's being led by the Director of Ideas, the Assistant Director of Ideas, Omega Hollies, this Thursday, and everyone's invited. And next week, on Wednesday, the 29th, we have a Holocaust speaker. Stephen Hess is joining us to speak a little bit more about our history and inform our future. And you're all invited to that as well. So check us out on Facebook. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.